Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton, where in our open and welcoming community we live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. We welcome you whether you're joining us here in Channing Hall or on Zoom and YouTube Live. It's wonderful to be together on this brand new day. And we do extend a special welcome to our visitors. We're really happy that you've joined us this morning. We'd love to learn more about you and give you any information that you like about our congregation. If you haven't already stopped by the newcomer table just outside those back doors in Robinson Lounge, please do so on your way out so that we can put you on our e-list and help you learn more about our congregation. Again, it's wonderful to be together this morning. You may have seen the email this morning, but just in case, we are postponing two events that we had scheduled for after worship today, the Welcoming 101 workshop and Alan Oliver's talk on Buddhism. Both will be rescheduled because we want to emphasize instead the Justice for Tyree Nichols March that was just organized over the weekend and is happening today at noon in Palmer Square. And if you're going down to that march, please feel free to carpool from here. You can leave your car here and ride together, or if you want a nice brisk walk this morning, you can leave your car here as well. Might make parking easier down there in Palmer Square today. And also, if you are involved with a local organization that could benefit from grant money that we raise during the spring sale at UU Princeton every May, then please consider sponsoring that organization for an outreach grant. You can contact Gareth Funkeley for a sponsorship form, and you can just email the church office. That's office@uuprinceton.org, and we will put you in contact with Gareth and he can steer you through that process. And now, friends, on this holy day, let us gather in peace and unity, as one before the grace and grandeur of life, as children before its great and loving mystery. In this hour, may we know anew the holy joy of human lives growing together, so that this hour will imbue all those to come with that same sacred awareness. Come, let us worship together.
As we light our chalice, let us light our own spirit with the spirit of love, so that we may see the way to be gentler, to love ourselves deeper, hear ourselves louder. Let it burn away fear and doubt, that we may open our hearts wider to each other, today and every day.
And let us join together in the spirit of prayer. Blessed are you who gathers us together in joy and love, who balances our solitude with fellowship, who brings us to the company of those who make us laugh and think and feel and breathe more easily. We ask your blessings on the lonely, the tired, the ill, the anxious, and for guidance in reaching out and offering connection. Make us beings of active goodwill, even that of the momentary kindnesses offered in the rushed, unremarkable spaces of life. Make us mirrors of grace and care. Make us patient. Make us good neighbors and good strangers, that those we encounter will experience a moment of peace and goodwill in our company. We are grateful for the sun and the sky, the moon and the stars, for dusk and dawn where the light paints the sky anew each moment. Lift our faces toward its light, its warmth, its new and ancient beauty, and in this kindle in us a sense of connection with all life, united under that one light. Let our hearts hear the music of nature, so new and fresh and hopeful amidst the din and noise of what often surrounds us. Bring us into its peace that we may be more peaceful. Great Spirit of the ancestors and the children, you have gifted us with life, gifted us with one another, and gifted us with a world of depth and beauty. May we always be grateful for these gifts. May we lift up praise for them, and may our mindful embrace of them make us better servants of your hope and goodness in the world we're creating and sharing together. And here in the silence of this sacred space, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts. May it be so, and amen.
I fell in love with the United States on my very first night here. I was exhausted from leaving 4,000 miles and everything I knew behind, and from the culture shock of my very first New York City cab ride. I sat gingerly on the fire escape of the tiny Harlem apartment I landed in, and I watched traffic zip away on Broadway below, endless waves of lights and American dreams. And I fell in love. I can and I will try to explain, but the truth is that my feelings were set in those very first moments, feeling the heart of the city beat in my bones. I spent my first few days canvassing New York sidewalks, drunk on jet lag and fueled almost entirely by my new best friend Starbucks, on a mission to figure out which neighborhood to settle in, quite deluded into thinking that my preference rather than rent would decide whether uptown or downtown, east or west. And somewhere between feeling like I was thrown in one of my favorite TV shows and the personal triumph of figuring out the subway system, I discovered something I really wasn't expecting. I was home. I fell in love with squirrels and 24-hour bodegas, with giant fridges and giant beds. And I fell in love with that raw energy that's still hanging in the air of fresh beginnings and breaking new grounds. And I fell in love with freedom, the kind with a capital F. I didn't exactly grow up in a repressive society, and I never felt I lacked for freedom. But French people value something a little different. They mostly value and fight for liberty, the freedom of the whole, not being oppressed by the powerful few. And I, too, believed in the betterment of society over the individual. But when the freedom of the powerless few comes under attack, it becomes harder to get society to care. It promotes an homogeneous society with common values, but it leaves behind those who are not quite conforming enough. And unsurprisingly, some of those common values are common prejudices. I grew up steeped in open racism, in misogyny, in intolerance that ran unquestioned through society. And when people feel unchallenged, judging their neighbors for their religion or for their sexual orientation, they start feeling entitled to judge all. And we all have to live under constant scrutiny. As a young girl and as a minority, that scrutiny is quite intense, and it goes remarkably uncontested. It is normal for perfect strangers to question appearances or demeanor, to critique spiritual practice or pry into your romantic life as a matter of fact. It is even more common to experience someone's silent judgment. If you had asked me there and then why I was feeling a new lightness in those first few days in the US, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. But as I started to look back on my experience of freedom to write this reflection, something started to emerge. I recognize now that I was experiencing a sense of relief from escaping some of the constant and open scrutiny that had been with me all my life. Here, people are challenged, as a matter of fact, to respect and even defend the personal freedom of others to maintain their own. When we witness individual freedom being defended, we may feel confident enough in the pursuit of our own happiness to not scrutinize others. I was experiencing the tolerance that comes from people recognizing the value of their own personal freedom. When I came to the US, I really wasn't looking for a place to call home, and I wasn't looking to adopt American values. I finally embraced my home here when it came under threat in 2016. The thought that it might be taken away was enough to inspire me to become an American citizen and finally openly acknowledge that here is where I belong. I am finally embracing freedom under a different kind of threat, my crippling fear of disappointing Reverend Bill. I was ready to tell a much different story today, but here I am, having to own up to dismissing America out of hand again. I'm grateful that I came to realize that I should cherish the freedom I have been offered here and help defend it for everyone.
And with that, we welcome Audrey Pico to the Worship Associates. Thank you so much for joining the team and offering your reflections into our shared worship life. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Once there was a curmudgeon returning home when she tripped over a pot that someone had left on the path. She cut her leg, and in her anger and anguish, she cursed whoever left the pot there. "May their firstborn be struck dumb," she shouted as she tended her wound. And the curse echoed through the air, finding the tongue of the young girl whose father had dropped the pot there the day before. The young girl woke up and was unable to speak. She had no voice, and no one in her family knew why. They consulted medicine men and elders and shamans. No one could help. And as she grew older, it seemed as though she would just never be able to speak again. One day, a boy her age saw her working in a field and became kind of smitten with her. He learned about her inability to speak and decided to consult the tree spirit and see if there was something that could be done. The tree spirit, he believed, would know how to return her voice. And so, by the light of the moon, with no one around, he visited the great tree and told the story. A hare lived beneath the tree, though, and the hare heard the story and told the boy in this disguised voice that indeed he, the tree spirit, could return the girl's voice, but that it would require many offerings of fresh vegetables and berries. The boy should leave those at the base of the tree every night, and once the offerings were enough, he, the tree spirit, would return the girl's voice. So day after day, the boy left his offerings, and the hare ate very well, and the girl remained very silent. Eventually, however, something unusual happened in the ways of these stories. The hare developed a conscience. The hare started to feel bad about what he was doing. A little guilt crept in, a little shame too. Guilt and shame aren't good in great quantity, but a little can be helpful now and again. They can force a sort of moral clarity that might lead one to stop taking advantage of another, for example, as the hare was doing to the lovelorn boy and by extension, the silent girl and her family who loved her. He began to believe that he could heal the girl himself. And so one morning he went to where she was working in the field and tried to start talking to her. She just ignored him. He offered to help her. She still ignored him. He then decided to try a different approach. And as the girl worked her way down a long row, planting millet seedlings, he went behind her, planting another row of seedlings. He, however, planted them upside down with the roots in the air waving around in the breeze so that they wouldn't grow properly. When the girl finished her row, she turned around to see her work, saw what the hare did, and realized that she would have to undo everything he just did. "You fool, what are you doing?" she shouted. And then she smiled broadly and realized that she could speak again and ran off to celebrate with her parents. The hare, dirty, tired, and newly aware that he would not be receiving free vegetables and berries every morning anymore, grumbled, "So like humans, never a word of thanks." Through honest trickery that sprung from greedy deceit, the girl was freed from her affliction. Her voice was unbound, her tongue untied, and she could speak and sing and whisper and perhaps even strike up a conversation with the smitten boy who prayed to a god for a healing that only a hare would provide. The fable is an illustration of the notion that freedom is what you do with what's been done to you, as Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote. The idea is that while the world always presses in upon us and limits choice, the world always does something to us. Freedom is present on some level if a choice can be made. The hare had not complete freedom in his life, for no one does, but he did have the freedom to trick or to help. He did both, and thus gave us a fable that can guide us in using our freedom to try and unbind others as well. Sartre often wrote with total oppression in mind. He was very interested in how people use freedom to act in the face of great forces that seek to limit as much freedom as they can get away with. That intersection of freedom and totalitarianism interested him. In particular, how individuals make choices with whatever freedom they have, both in their own individual and collective interests. Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you, is a way of saying that given whatever restrictions we have, freedom is found in the choices we make, in what we do, how we think, what we say, what we write, how we move through the world. A slice of that thinking would be picked up just a little later by academics who developed what would be called process theology or process relational theology. A little part of that system involves ethics that argues that the most ethical way to act in another's interest, particularly if that person is in need of assistance, is to increase the number of options that that person can consider when they're making choices. It's not to make decisions for them, but to increase the number of decisions that they can realistically make. It calls aid givers to be more collaborator than savior, to be creative and empowering rather than prescriptive, to listen more than to speak, and to befriend rather than teach. It's the kind of path that calls not for expert anything other than a strong sense of relationality and the unrelenting practice of respect. That doesn't mean direct aid and assistance aren't sometimes necessary and warranted, but it does mean that the long-term and more ethical goal should be to help create more options for people so that they can have better choices from which to choose, for that's real freedom. That process increases that freedom and eventually develops the kind of self-reliance that allows the then freer person to help create the same relational conditions for others, and the wheel turns on and on, as they say. None of that was expressly on the mind of the ancient ones who created that fable and told it over centuries. It comes from the Xhosa people in South Africa and was originally an oral tale that has been written down in various forms. Today's version was a retelling of the story as it was included in the book Nelson Mandela's Favorite African Folk Tales. Mandela, of course, served 27 years in a South African prison for his work to demolish apartheid. Upon being freed, as apartheid was being abolished, he served as president of the African National Congress and as president of South Africa. His journey was literally a journey from a jail cell to the presidency. One of the themes of his life, perhaps that for which he would become best known, was freedom and forgiveness. He had been personally and systemically mistreated by an evil regime, separated from his family and loved ones for almost 3 decades, abused, threatened with death, and aware that the people he loved the most in the world were also being targeted. And yet he became convinced that his own freedom was larger than his own self, that his imprisonment also bound the people of his country and the actual jailers who allowed him to be imprisoned. His seminal work is titled Long Walk to Freedom, and in it he wrote, "It was during those long and lonely years that my hunger for the freedom of my own people became a hunger for the freedom of all people, Black and white. I knew as well as I knew anything that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. One who takes away another's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. They are locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken away from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity." And he continues, "When I walked out of prison, that was my mission, to liberate the oppressed and the oppressor both. Some say that has now been achieved, but I know that is not the case. The truth is that we are not yet free. We have merely achieved the freedom to be free, the right not to be oppressed. We have not taken the final step of our journey, but the first step on a longer and even more difficult road. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. The true test of our devotion to freedom is just beginning." In the poem, I Look at the World, Langston Hughes similarly links personal and collective freedom, starting the piece with his sense of self and moving to something broader. That poem reads, I look at the world from awakening eyes in a black face, and this is what I see, this fenced off narrow space assigned to me. I look then at the silly walls through dark eyes in a dark face, and this is what I know, that all these walls oppression builds will have to go. I look at my own body with eyes no longer blind, and I see that my own hands can make the world that's in my mind. Then let us hurry, comrades, the road to find. And Mandela echoes this in return, concluding the excerpt with, I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not yet ended. Mandela died in 2013, but the road he traveled and that Hughes envisioned still stretches out before us, a road of freedom, and one in which that freedom comes through more and more opportunity for everyone. The opportunities to learn and work, to be safe and protected, to build a family who is also safe and protected. And this day, yet another reminder, the freedom to be treated fairly and with restraint by authorities. We've witnessed again and again the binding of this freedom by the misuse of force that results in unmitigated tragedy, tears and anger and unanswerable questions that compound the mistrust between the police and the policed, and that, in addition to harming and killing innocent people, harm and destroy the social fabric, the civil trust, and a strong sense of the common good. Beyond these days, however, lies one road that we nonetheless must travel together in protest, in sadness, and in reform, and in an abiding commitment not to our own individual freedom, but to the freedom of neighbor and stranger as well. So long as we fail to travel this road together, we are dooming those to come to have to sift through increasing piles of social rubble. The poet Naomi Shihab Nye phrases this more elegantly in her poem Shoulders, when she writes, a man crosses the street in the rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him now. No car drive too close to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. His ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide. The rain will never stop falling. She reminds us that we have some say over the conditions of the road that we travel, chiefly how we travel that road together. And it must be in one another's interests, and it must be even more so in the interests of those young ones being carried. I think about that when I go back to that story, the one with which we started, one of Mandela's favorites about the hare who, through inventive trickery, helps the girl who can't speak. It's easy to forget in the mystical world of that fable, and especially its conclusion, that the girl is cursed by someone she's never met who is angry at someone she doesn't know but turns out to be the girl's father. The girl who can't speak because of an adult who never met her but still cursed her. That's what bound her tongue. That's what took her voice. An adult who should be charged with protecting the young ones caused great harm to the young one because she stumbled over something in her path. And then no adult could come help the kid. And so a talking hare has to, like a stuffed animal, come to life. One brought to her in a roundabout way by another young person. Her freedom to speak comes in spite of adults, but only in company with the boy and the bunny. It's a road they have to travel together, even if they don't always know that that's what they're doing. One's greater freedom is always realized in relation to others. It, like everything else, is supremely relational and elementally interconnected. And just as Mandela modeled and the poets imagined traveling this road together, watching carefully in each other's interest, increasing one another's options for safety and opportunity, expanding the choices that one can make with their own freedom. This is how we do freedom today, as Sartre wrote. Freedom is what you do when you build freedom into the world and into the lives of people. Some you know, most you don't. This is the rising tide of freedom that lifts every boat, the dawning of a new freedom that loosens every chain, the key of freedom that not only opens every prison door and releases every captive, but also creates conditions for forgiveness, even for Mandela, even, I imagine, for the innocent girl, even for the hare who, after feeling a little guilt and shame, translated that into doing freedom for another person. And yes, sure, he should have been thanked. But in the girl's defense, she probably had no idea what he was doing and didn't know that she should thank him. She just knew that she could speak. And so she ran off to share her good news with her parents as she could. And for the hare, that has to be the real reward. A child bounding away across a field, joyful and carefree. May we in our lives be like the hare, crafty if sometimes a little too cunning, stubborn if sometimes a little selfish, and eventually an agent of freedom and the good. May it be so, and amen. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of greater love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with neighbor and stranger by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.